Hi everybody, it's Jen. Welcome back to my channel, Hallmark Plus More, where we watch and talk about shows, movies, mysteries, Hallmark ornaments, and anything else that floats our boat. So today I'm going to be reviewing a Hallmark original series called The Way Home, Season 3, Episode 4. Before I get into the review, I just want to say thank you to everybody who likes, comments, watches, subscribes to my channel. I appreciate you more than you know. I welcome any comments if you want to spin theories or just kind of tell me what you think about the show, because that's what's so great about this show is I feel like you can just talk about it for hours, just about what you think about the time travel and all the many characters. So I do want to say thank you to Minor Groove One. You left me a comment. I appreciate it so much. I responded to your comment, so thank you for taking the time to just write a comment. I love to be able to talk about the episode and what you guys thought. So to anybody watching this, if you have any comments or just want to talk and spin theories, don't hesitate to leave me a comment. Make sure you like and subscribe, and we can definitely talk about it. So thank you for your comment, and I look forward to anybody else who wants to comment on the show. So getting into the review, at the beginning of every episode, it always does a quick flashback, previously on the way home, right? And normally when you see those flashbacks, because there's so much going on. Normally, in my opinion, when you see those flashbacks, they're not necessarily always of the last episode, but it could have been something from last season or a couple episodes ago. So when I see that little bit, 2 to 3 minutes into the show, I'm like, all right, is that what the show is going to be about? So it kind of gets me excited for the watching the whole episode. So this episode had the flashback with Dell seeing the note saying, there are holes and somebody is poking at them. And of course, she's talking to Colton, on the bed. She always has that conversation with her dead husband. It's always in the bedroom, personal. She talks to him. So I was like, okay, cool. They're showing this in the flashback. Maybe this episode we're going to find out who's writing the notes, right? So that was kind of promising. And then you also see in the flashback Casey's ring around her neck, and you see the little tidbit with Alice telling Kat, I think Casey could be from the future. So all of that was in like the the minute or 2 minute little flashback of this is what's coming on this episode. So right then at the beginning, I was like, yes, those are two things I definitely want to know. I also want to know who pushed Alice into the pond, but they still haven't told us that. So the reason why I desperately want to know, or I shouldn't say desperately, but curious, because the people who know about the time travel are related to Alice or know Alice. So it's just hard for me to think like, was Colton traveling? Did he push Alice in? Was it somebody from the 70s? Are we going to find out Thomas can travel and he gets to get together with Kat? Like, who could have pushed her in the pond? You know what I mean? Because it seems like the time travel is really on Landry property. So that's what kind of throws me. Like, why would somebody push her? So that's why that is one of those questions I still want to have answered. Unfortunately, that wasn't a part of the little preview in the middle, or at the beginning rather, but hopefully we'll find out at some point. Spoiler alert, they don't tell you this episode either, but they do give you a little indication at the end. So I'll talk about that at the end of the episode. So it starts out the actual episode, once we get back to the flashbacks, of Jacob, of little Jacob. So this was before he went in the pond, and it's him and Colton, and they're in a tent. So they're doing kind of like a camp out, like when you were a kid and you used to sleep under the stars and camp outside your house in your backyard. Right, so it's a cute little, moment between Jacob and Colton. And honestly, when I first watched it, I was like, okay, is this real or is this Jacob dreaming it? Because you really don't know with all the time travel, go back and forth. And, they kind of have a nice little father-son moment. Jacob wakes up. Colton's still asleep in the tent, and and Jacob goes inside where Colton's sleeping in the tent. So I'm like, okay, he goes inside. Now we're going to see something else. But he goes inside and he sees Cyrus. And as soon as I saw him, like, I got goosebumps, right? Because he just looks evil. He's Cyrus, and he's got the top hat on, and he just has this stern look on his face. And it just kind of freaked me out for a moment, because you see this little boy having this nice moment with his dad. They camped out. He's going inside the next morning, and you're thinking he's going to call out to Dell to have breakfast or a bowl of cereal. And then boom, you see Cyrus. And he actually says something to me. He says, "Your family is gone. You left them with me." And I was like, whoa, you know what I mean? Like, he walks into his real house, present day house. But then once he gets through the door, it looks like his house from, 1814. And Cyrus is sitting there in a chair. And that's when he says that to him. The house is empty. And he says that, and Jacob screams, and he wakes up in present day 2025 as a 30-year-old something, and I was like, whoa, okay. So he's obviously having nightmares. Who wouldn't, with what Cyrus put him through? But still, that was a little, you start out as this cute little memory. You're like, oh, Jacob has a little boy. And then boom, you see Cyrus, and he's like serious as hell, and he like looks so evil, right? And, and Jacob is like a grown man, and he wakes up basically sweating and screaming. So that kind of was like, whoa, okay. And then Dell actually gets another unsigned note. This time it says, "I know about your family. Soon they all will," quote unquote. So, I mean, the notes, in my opinion, are getting worse. Like, you have holes, we're poking them. But this is saying, like, I'm basically going to be a whistleblower and tell. But what are they going to tell? What do they know? Who is it from? So we don't find out who the notes are from in this episode. But, I mean, you saw it in the flashback, and she gets another one in this episode. So these aren't going away, right? And anytime she gets those notes, this time she read it in the kitchen, or grabbed it in the kitchen, but I apologize. She reads it in the bedroom. It's like, her bedroom is her personal space. And from what I can see, you don't really see Kat or Jacob or Alice ever approach Dell in her bedroom. It seems like that's her sacred place. And it's also where she has these conversations with her dead husband. You always see Colton sitting on the bed when she has these conversations. So, this isn't anything new with her typical letters. She gets a letter, she reads it in her bedroom, and Colton is sitting on the bed because she's like, "I don't know what to do, Colton." And, Colton obviously is dead, but he talks to her, and he says, like, "Hey, you need to tell Jacob and Kat about these letters. That's what you need to do." And of course, Dell's still conflicted. She doesn't tell them about it in this episode, but, this is a storyline that is kind of going with each episode. She's getting these notes, and they all mean and are written differently. This one, I think, is the most threatening. Before you could say, are they bluffing? Yeah, there's holes. I'm poking holes. But this one is saying, "I know about your family, and soon they all will." So, I mean, this is like, to me, the most threatening letter. So, Colton, she's basically saying Colton wants her to tell the kids, and she doesn't yet. So that is something personal that Dell's kind of dealing with on the side, with everything that you see with the time travel. Because this is all new to Dell too, so to speak. We still think that Dell has something to hide back in the 70s that she doesn't want Alice and Kat to see. At least I think. But this is also something she's dealing with on the side. She has a relationship with Sam. Sam doesn't know anything about the time travel, so she has to have an intimate relationship with somebody. She's keeping this big secret. Now she's continuing to keep the secret about the letter. So I feel like, Dell has a lot going on with her too. And she does eventually, she does apologize to Kat for her outburst. You probably saw in the comments that I talked with that with Minor Grove One. We kind of mentioned that, about her outburst was really out of character for Dell. I know she's going through a lot too, but the way she kind of flipped out on Kat, I was like, whoa, that's not really your demeanor. But at the same time, I've noticed Hallmark kind of keeps the conflict between Kat and Dell. I saw an interview with Annie McDowell, and she actually made a comment about it. And of course, don't quote me on this, I'm paraphrasing. But she kind of said, like, they're both alpha women, and so they're going to butt heads. She's like, Dell is used to being on her own, and now she has Kat and Jacob back. They're both adults. She's kind of navigating that, and I think she just kind of snapped thinking she's losing Kat again, even though she's just next door, So, Andy McDowell kind of explained that too, saying Hallmark has them kind of butting heads as they're both alpha women, or alpha leads, so to speak. But she did actually apologize to Kat, and they kind of had a heart-to-heart about love. Talked about Elliot, like, I really do like Elliot. So I feel like they kind of closed that, or kind of talked about that a little bit, which makes me feel better too, because I always thought that was a little out of character for Dell, even though I know she's going through a lot. She shouldn't have jumped on. And Alice, I think, is okay with her mom living with Elliot, but at the time she was distracted, so I don't think that helped the situation. Like, Kat was like, well, Alice is okay with me moving in, and when Dell kind of snapped at her, Alice was like, yeah. So I think Dell thought at the time she was kind of defending Alice too, because Alice didn't really jump in and support her mom for living with Elliot. Not that she was thinking about Rick and the funeral, and she had a lot going on that she was thinking about, but I think that might be why Dell kind of snapped too, like, hey, your daughter's not even, pushing you on it. But anyways, they did kind of apologize, and they had that heart to heart. So you always love that, but I think there's still always going to be conflict between the two. And with Jacob, you saw that with him, and he's having these nightmares of seeing Cyrus, right? And then they get a phone call, and the phone call is Lewis, which is Evelyn Goodwin's son, is calling to talk to Jacob and is asking him to come to Lindenmore. So Dell's like, well, I'm going to come with you. Well, she doesn't necessarily say that then at the phone call, but when Jacob is ready to go later on, Dell's like, I'm coming with you, which I am so glad she did, because Jacob was a little conflicted going back to the Goodwins location, the Lindenmore. So, and then, of course, Alice and Kat, they go back, time travel together to the 70s. Alice wants to see Evelyn, see how she's handling, Rick's death, but also handling Colton and Dell, right? Because Evelyn confessed to Alice that she likes Colton and, wanting to be that friend. She doesn't have Rick to rely on. So Colton's really her best friend, and now Colton's falling for the person that is supposedly Evelyn's friend, which is Dell. And Kat said, I want to go back and talk to Fern. So I was super excited. You probably heard my review about the last episode. I love Fern. I think everything she says is like liquid gold. Like, every word out of her mouth you want to dissect, right? Because it might act like she's old and senile, but she's not. She knows about time travel. Everything she said, I just want to write down and go, what does this mean? Because, the song she was singing, they found out it was about the pond, the town vote about filling in the Landry pond. So, she wasn't just singing a weird song. It meant something. But I thought it was, interesting that Evelyn was singing it. Because, Fern is a Landry, like how Evelyn, would be singing the same song. So there's still a lot there that you want to know. But that, I got excited when Kat said that. However, unfortunately, Fern is not present in this episode. I really hope she's in other episodes, because seriously, I love seeing her. I'm hoping we'll see a young Colton with Fern, because obviously we see Colton and his love story with Dell. So I got excited when Kat said that in the first 5 minutes of the show, but you don't see Fern. But that's okay. When you go back, you see Evelyn at the pond. So Alice is like, whoa, there's Evelyn. I'm going to go. And Kat goes the other direction to find Fern. And she's reciting Shakespeare. She's very carefree, kind of like a hippie Evelyn. So I wasn't surprised she's quoting, Shakespeare. And Kat, and so she kind of talks to Evelyn, how are you doing? And they go back to Lindenmore, which is a little... that was I like the way Hallmark did that. Like Evelyn and Alice in the 70s went back to Lindenmore because Evelyn was like, look, come back to my house with me. Colton's supposed to come back later today. Let's go out. So obviously Alice is like, yeah, I want to see Colton. I want to see Dell. I'll go back with you. And then, 2 seconds later, you see Dell and Jacob come to Lindenmore as well. So it was like you see Lindenmore in the 70s, and then 2 seconds later, you see Jacob and Dell roll up to Lindenmore in present 2025. So it was like, they kind of had those scenes back to back. So it was interesting to see. Alice was watching this, conspire between Colton and Dell. They look out the window and Dell's, sunbathing by the pool. And everyone's like, yeah, Dell doesn't really go out much. She just hangs by the pool. So Colton comes, obviously has this interaction with Dell, and they're flirting, right? They're flirting, and Alice and Evelyn are seeing everything from the window. So they agree to go out. So basically, Evelyn tells Alice, let's spy on their first date. So Alice and Evelyn are like, dressed in glasses, and they're spying on them, and they're going on a boat ride. And so, Colton and Dell is not very big on boats, so she was hesitant to go out on the boat. But Colton convinces her, and Colton and Dell go out on the boat for their first date. They come back, and Ellen and Alice are kind of seeing them kind of argue, like Dell is walking away from Colton. And it turns out she must have got nervous or seasick because she threw up. And so she's like, I'm very embarrassed that I threw up. Like, we're done. Colton starts singing and serenading her. And she comes back, and Colton wants to kiss her, and she's like, no, I just threw up, like my bad breath. And Colton was like, I don't care. So they kiss, and and that's when Evelyn and Alice are like, oh, well, they're falling in love or whatever. Which I have to say, side note, personally, I have never kissed a man who had just vomited. So when I heard that, I was like, Colton, you must really love her if she just threw up and you're still like, I don't care about your breath. I still want to kiss you. I can't imagine that. That's got to be true love. I'd be like, yeah, I got to go brush my teeth. So, it's kind of creepy and gross. But when you hear Dell say that, like, no, you don't want to kiss me, my breath, I just threw up. And Colton's like, I don't care. And they share this kiss. And, Alice thinks that she just saw them fall in love. But you find out later, Dell sitting on the bed with Colton. Because Alice comes back and tells Dell, I saw your first date. I saw when you guys first fell in love. And Colton's sitting next to Dell in 2025 as the dead man, right? Nobody sees him. But he says, that really wasn't the time. And then when she's in her bedroom, and like I said, nobody really goes in her bedroom, and she talks to Colton on the bed, you find out that wasn't when they first fell in love, but it was later that day. And so that moment when they look at each other and they both know that they kind of fell for each other was a more of a private moment, which I thought was really sweet. And she didn't tell Alice, because I think Alice thought it was sweet that she saw the moment her grandparents fell in love. But it wasn't that moment. They still have that special moment on the side of the road. And so, anyways, that was kind of sweet to be able to witness that. However, Alice actually says out loud, "Then why am I here? Like, if I don't need to put Colton and Dell together, they did that on their own. Why am I here?" And then she looks at Evelyn. She goes, "Oh, I mean, I'm here for you." And so, like, I don't think Alice meant to say that out loud, but she was kind of saying to the pond, like, you bring me to where I need to be. I don't need to be here. Colton and Dell, they patched it up on their own, but she was there to comfort Evelyn because Evelyn was having a really hard time. She even said, "That's supposed to be me on the boat," right? So that was hard for her to watch. So Kat was really just there for, to comfort Elliot. I mean, I'm sorry, to comfort Evelyn. And then Kat, like I said, we think she is going to see Fern. I got all excited about that. And she doesn't. She actually goes to the house, obviously, and before she gets to the house, she sees Jasper. Jasper Coyle, remember he owns Coyle, finds out he's related to Thomas. So Jasper's on his way to see Fern to give her magazines from the 1920s because she said Fern was very interested in that. So I don't know if that's a side note that we're supposed to remember at some point down the line that Fern was really interested in the 1920s. But, Jasper says, yeah, I moved here in 65 and always been close with Fern and the town meetings. So it turns out he has the records from the town meeting. So Kat goes back with Jasper. Now remember, this was a long time ago, 1965. It's not like they had, all of these fancy recordings. So it was just a record. There wasn't any physical notes or computer. So she's really just listening to a record and hearing the town meeting. And it was fascinating. I actually rewound it a couple times to make sure I was hearing everything correctly. So you hear the recording from the meeting, and of course, this is September in 1965. The town vote about filling in the Landry Pond because Kat wants to know what perspired. Fern obviously went to the town meeting because she was there in 65. It was her property. So, Kat's like, I want to hear what went on. So Kat and Jasper listen to it, and somebody says, "Kids almost drowned." And Kat's like, "What happened?" And Jasper's like, "Shh, listen to the thing." And so somebody goes, "Well, the kids almost drowned." And Fern tells people, you need to calm down. And she calls out the Goodwins. She's like, "Look, you Goodwins, everybody needs to calm down. The pond is important to my family and it's on my property and I can do what I want." So that's quoting Fern. So she's speaking her mind. So again, another reason why I love Fern. I think she's on point. But in this town meeting, she's saying, back off. Nobody got hurt. It's important to my family. It's on my property. You can't tell me to fill it in. And she specifically called out the Goodwins. So I'm like, okay, why do they want it to be filled so bad? And then you hear this little girl. It's almost like over the crowd. "Can I say something?" And you're like, and Kat looks over at Jasper and is like, "Is that Evelyn?" And Jasper's like, "Yeah, she was probably 7 or 8 at the time." So it turns out Evelyn was the little girl that fell in the pond, and Colton saved her life. So Evelyn speaks up and says, "Pond is special, it's magic." So, and then she says, "You saw it, Colton. I know you did." And then that's the end of the meeting. I actually rewound it to hear exactly what she said. So that means a young Colton was also in this town meeting. So apparently, when they said the kids could have drowned, Goodwin was talking about their daughter, Evelyn, and Colton jumped into the pond and saved Evelyn, so to speak. And so Evelyn was like, "No, you don't fill it in. The pond is magic. It's special." And then she says to Colton, "You saw it too, Colton. I know you did." So as a 7 or 8-year-old girl, she's saying this to Colton. So what did they see? What do they know? Right? And that's all you hear of the record. So, Kat immediately goes to this and says, he must not be able to time travel. If he went in the pond to save Evelyn and he didn't get pulled under, maybe he can't time travel. And he didn't get, or she, Kat runs home and tells Elliot, because that's where she's living now, and she's like, Evelyn's life, Colton saved Evelyn's life, and he didn't get sucked in, is what she said. He didn't get sucked in, so maybe he can't time travel. So I mean, that's interesting too. Like, we always know that Evelyn and Colton, they know something about the pond, that they're not talking about. I want to know, what did Evelyn see? You saw it too, Colton. You know what I mean? Like, what did they see? So there's so much information in here. So much information. I actually have like a list of notes, because there's so much going on. Especially with Jacob. They go to Lindemore. I kind of told you how they have them back to back, right? Evelyn and Alice go to Lindemore, and then 2 seconds later you see present day Dell and Jacob. And I'm so glad that Dell went with Jacob, because I knew it was going to be hard for him, right? I mean, he's trying to navigate in 2025, but he's going back to this place, and he still has nightmares with Cyrus, because you saw that at the beginning of the episode. So you can kind of see Jacob getting troubled, right? So they pull up in their pickup truck in 2025. They get out, right? And they're walking up to the front door, and I mean, I got goosebumps. I'm still getting goosebumps thinking about it. I almost thought it was like a statue. You know how when you go to those memorials and you have like the guards, or even, in London, and they have the big hats, and you try to make them laugh or whatever, and they're like statues. They refuse to move. That's what I first thought, because when Jacob looks at the front door, you see Cyrus again, and he's in its top hat, big black top hat, and he's just standing there, and he's got like no smile on his face. He just looks pure evil. And it's almost like a smirk. You know what I mean? And it was just, and Jacob like freezes, right? I mean, he's walking up the stairs with Dell, and he just sees like Cyrus standing there by the front door, like staring him down. And then 2 seconds later, you see Lewis come out, Evelyn's son. Hey, welcome to Vindemore, and come on in, right? So he says, welcome to Lindemore, and, they walk in, and Jacob turns around, and Cyrus is gone, because obviously he's not there in real life. It's just, this flashback and this image that he's having as he's struggling with that. So obviously, like I said, Cyrus isn't there, but it's, he goes up with Dell, and he sees him, and then Lewis says, welcome to Lindemore, which I will mention in a minute. That also spooked him. So they go in, and they go to this room, and it was Cyrus's office, and there's a huge picture on the wall of Cyrus. And there's a desk, and Lewis was like, yeah, this is the room where my family had all their business discussions and stuff. And of course, Jacob is seeing this huge portrait. I mean, huge. It takes up the whole wall. And he looks down, because there's a big desk, obviously, if it's an office. He looks down at the sofa, and right below the portrait, he sees Cyrus sitting there, right? Obviously, he's not, but he's seeing this image. And he, like, freezes. And Lewis is talking, and Dell, Lewis basically is a businessman, even though this is the same man who blew up at the book signing, or the book release. Remember, Kat had Suzanne Augustine's book published, and it talked about the Goodwins and Cyrus being a bad person and everything, and Lewis, obviously a Goodwin on the side of Cyrus, had that blowout. Remember, you probably saw it in my other reviews, and Jacob defends Kat, and Jacob's like, that's not true, Cyrus was a bad man. So they mention that in Lindemore. They're like, why do you want Jacob to work for you? I mean, you remember you had that blow up, and you're mad at us, over this book. And he goes, I'm a businessman. Jacob, you've done so good with the farm. You're new age, you're, how you're doing your produce. And, so basically Lewis wants to hire him. He's going in the wine business. He knows Jacob has done so good in an advancement on the farm. obviously from actually having to do it without all of these machines back in 1814. But that's basically what he is wanting Jacob for. He wants to hire him to help with his property because he's going to get into the wine business. So, I mean, he's there listening, but seeing Cyrus at the door, seeing the portrait, seeing Cyrus sitting in the office, it was a lot for him to take. So he actually like it almost looks like he has tears in his eyes, and he basically is like walks out of the room. So then Dell's like, okay, well, we're gonna think about it, and they leave. And before they leave, right in the foyer when you walk in, you see a flashback of the men bringing in Jacob in front of Cyrus, and Cyrus says, "Welcome to Lindenmore," and that's where he was tortured. So like that was when I said I'll mention that later. When he walks in to the front door and Lewis says, "Welcome to Lindenmore," and he sees Cyrus there, he's remembering when Cyrus said, "Welcome to Lindenmore," and he's like imprisoning him, right? So, I mean, that was a bad flashback. So, Dell doesn't really understand why he's so taken by this, situation. So Jacob is kind of quiet on the way home. And then later you see Dell just doing laundry, walks past Jacob's room. Jacob got out of the shower. He's in a towel. And you can see all the markings and scars on his back. So Dell, sees it, and her mouth almost like drops. She actually has to go to her bed and like sit down. I feel like she was holding a basket of laundry and she was just and it just like, why does my son have all these markings, right? So I mean, she wants to confront Jacob, but you can tell she's like concerned, and she does. She confronts Jacob in the kitchen, and when I'm getting to that, and I'm looking at my notes because I actually wrote down when they talk about it. So Dell actually confronts him and says, "I saw the scars on your back," and that's when Jacob basically tells his mom, and this is heart wrenching for any parent. Any godparent, any grandparent, any stepchild, niece, nephews, anybody that you have that you're taking care of a child, this is hard to hear when you hear somebody's mistreated you. So, she's taken back. She knows something bad happened. So I'm glad Jacob actually tells her this, but I'm seeing this from a parent's perspective. And so I can I kind of feel for Dell, her expressions on her face as Jacob is talking. Like when she sees all of those scars and she sits down on her bed, like in shock, I can feel that. If that were me and I saw my son, like, what happened? So she actually asks him, and he says, Dell tells, or I'm sorry, Jacob tells Dell, Jacob says, "Cyrus, he didn't just imprison me, he tortured me. I would have died. Kat saved my life. Kat and Susanna nursed me back to health." And, that I think was Dell going, okay, that explains why, you know what I mean? You're talking to Lewis. Lewis wants to hire you to work at the Goodwin Lindenmore. And you're in a room where he's like, "Oh, yeah, that's Cyrus. This is where he did his business." And that's the same room that he, like, welcome to Lindenmore, living hell basically for you. And he was tortured there. So obviously going back, and he even said to Dell, like, "Yes, I know it was 200 years ago, but it was only 9 months for me. So these feelings, these scars, they're still raw." And he goes, "Mom, I'm broken." And I think, Dell had this heart to heart with Jacob. Dell says, "You're not broken, you will heal, and I'm here to help." It was just a touching moment. You kind of see tears in both their eyes. Like, I mean, Dell had a lot of heart to hearts in this episode. She apologized to Kat for that outburst, and they kind of had a heart to heart about love, about her with Elliot, her with Sam, and kind of, talked that through. I mean, she was absent for so much of Kat's life, right? When she was a teenager, she got pregnant, and then Kat wasn't with her mom the entire life of Alice, for 16 years of her life. So, I mean, they're navigating their adult mother-daughter friendship. So that was nice that they kind of had that heart-to-heart. And I'm glad she did apologize. And then now you're seeing another heart-to-heart with Dell and her other child, Jacob, finding out that he was brutally beaten and tortured by the same man's relative who they went to today. So you're walking into a house 9 months ago. Now, granted, 200 years history time, but 9 months ago, he was beaten and tortured by this man, this man's family. And now he wants to work in a place where he's going to be, revered as the father figure of the Goodwins. You know what I mean? I mean, he's got this huge portrait on the wall. This is Cyrus. These are, relative. And that's got to be difficult. So I feel like Dell knows why it was so hard for Jacob to walk into Lindenmore and speak with, Lewis, Evelyn's son, and seeing all these pictures of Cyrus, because all those flashbacks come back for him. So, I'm glad Dell knows, but that's hard to hear that somebody tortured your family, which I thought was kind of hard, because she's listening to this. She's finding out what happened with Jacob, right? And then later on, at the end of the episode, she's like, I know this is difficult for you, but you got to move on. This is a great opportunity, to work on his land. And I was kind of taken back by that. I was like, okay, I know you want Jacob to move on, but are you really suggesting that he should go back into that place? I mean, he could have died. This man tortured him, and you want to work in the same place? Like, I'm not sure I could do that. You know what I mean? When you have bad memories, sometimes the best thing to do is move on, not go back to the same place that, and that can be healing. Don't get me wrong, that can be closure. He can definitely get closure from that, but he can get closure by not working in the place he was tortured as well. There are other ways. So, I think Dell was trying to say, we need to move on. What didn't kill you, you're going to makes you stronger. You're going to get through this. But I was a little taken back that Dell was kind of like, encouraging him to think about the offer. So who knows if he'll do that, but I think that would be difficult to do. So yeah, Dell had a lot of heart-to-hearts, right? Even with Colton. And then, you see Kat and Elliot, she comes back, to tell Elliot about, the pond and what she found out about the town meeting. And they kind of have a little tiff, and she leaves. And then, later on, she kind of makes up with Elliot, and that's towards the end of the scene. But you also see there's a special moment where Colton, back in the 70s, talks to Alice. So he says, thank you for spending the day with Evelyn. I know this is hard on her. I have another date with Dell. But you saw that nice interaction of Colton thanking Alice. And he even says, are you going back to the pond? And Alice was like, yeah, I enjoy it. And Colton kind of confesses to him, yeah, my grandmother told me that the pond was special. And, she has these stories. I never really believed it. But the day of Rick's funeral, I tried it to see if I could save Rick. So that does answer one of the questions. Remember from a couple episodes ago, Alice sees Colton in the pond. And remember, he's like splashing, like he's angry. And you never find out why. And she basically confesses, this is why. I tried to see if I could go back and save Rick. And I guess I shouldn't believe my grandmother's stories because nothing happened. So you find out. But at some point you have to think that Colton time travels again, right? Because they're kind of leading you to believe that. But at least you find out why he was so frustrated in the pond that day. So thank you for answering that question. We still don't know who pushed Alice, but at least, Colton had that conversation with Alice. Like, look, I tried to go back and save Rick. Nothing happened. So at least, it was nice that she confided in that. There was so much going on in this episode. It was, I kind of love the way it ends too. Kat and Elliot kind of make up, and they're having dinner, listening to music, and they're kind of making out in the kitchen. And Kat sees something, and she's like, what is that? And she goes over to the chair, and it's a sweater. And I knew this meant something. You can probably see in my review a couple episodes ago when Alice was pushed in the pond, Elliot and Dell and all of them were there, and he picked up a sweater. Remember how I said Elliot just kind of picked it up? Either he recognized it or he just picked it up not even thinking about it, and they never spoke about it again. But I knew it meant something, and I knew it would come up eventually. Well, it came up. She is making out with Elliot in their kitchen, and she sees the sweater. She stops kissing him, pushes Elliot away, and goes, "What is that?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, I forgot to tell you that. That was a sweater, that we found at the pond when somebody pushed Alice in." Well, it's Colton's sweater from 1999. So that freaked out Kat. Like, she was like, "Okay, I got to go talk to Dell." So we just saw Colton confess to Alice, like, "Yeah, I tried to jump in to save Rick. Didn't happen." And then you also find out he jumped in to save Evelyn. So that's 2 times Colton supposedly has been in the pond and have not time traveled. However, now that you see a sweater from 1999 in 2025, now you're starting to think maybe he tried again and it worked. Why? Like, the pond takes you where you need to go. There's no rhyme or reason about that. So Kat grabs the sweater at Elliot's house and goes to talk to Dell. Like, "Okay, Dell, Mom, this is Dad's sweater. How did it get to here in 2025? Are you sure?" And all the time you've been with Dad, he never mentioned it. And, Dell's like, "No, no." And at one point, Dell even she gets a little upset, like, and she kind of just says, like, "No, I don't know about it." And Kat's like, try to remember. And she gets so frustrated, she says no, and she goes to the bedroom. And then, of course, like I said, every time she's in the bedroom scene by herself, she kind of talks to Colton. And Colton is there, and she says, like, "Why didn't you tell me?" Speaking about the pond. Or, "Why didn't you protect your son? Like, why didn't you try to go back to the pond and protect Jacob?" I think. So she's kind of struggling with that and talking to him about that. And then, in a heart-to-heart moment with her and Jacob, they were talking about mom mail, when she had to heart with Jacob, she was showing him, like, when you were a kid, you used to slip notes under the door, and and I remember that, and I know you're an adult now, but this is me remembering you as a child. So like I said, they had some one-on-one moments. But the other thing that I really enjoyed was towards the end. Whoops, I'm sorry, I have all these notes. Was you see Alice goes on a date with Noah. I think in my last video I said Kat a couple times and then I corrected myself, so I apologize if that was confusing. But Alice was going on the date with Noah. And they're sitting at a table and a man walks in, or a boy walks in, and you find out it's Max Goodwin. So Lewis's son, Max. So remember, we talked about Lewis. Goodwin wants to hire Jacob, work in Lindemore, work on the farm, help him. He wants to have this business with wine, knows how well he does on the farm at Landry's, like help produce and really become more profitable, and that's what he wants for himself. This is Max, teenager, Lewis's son. So he comes in and sits with them. And he's like, and Noah's like, "Yeah, he's one of my best customers. You might know him. His name's Max Goodwin. He just moved here with his dad, Lewis." And Alice goes, "Oh," she brings up Casey. She's like, "Oh, you must be Casey's brother." And both Max and Noah are like, "Who?" And they're like, "Casey." She said, "I've been trying to get a hold of her. Can you get a hold of her for me?" Or what's she been up to? And Max is like, "Who's Casey?" And Casey's like, your sister. I mean, like, she told me, and Noah and Max are just like, "I don't know." And then Max actually looks at Alice and says, "Somebody must be lying." So, like, Alice's face is just like, okay. Like, she, so Here's my question. I always say in my videos, I think Casey's from the future. I think that's what Hallmark wants you to think. Whether she is or not, that's the little breadcrumbs they're leaving, right? And this is no different. However, is she really a Goodwin? I mean, obviously, if she's from the future, then she's going to lie and say she's not from the future. You know what I mean? Like, because she has to have a reasoning on why she's there. But my thing is, if she has Alice's ring, is she really a Landry or is she a Goodwin? Or, I mean, what did she say that was really the truth? Because obviously she's not Max's sibling. So I still think she's from the future. But if she's lying about not being Max's brother and not being, Evelyn's grandson and Lewis's son, what else is she lying about? Maybe she's not a good one. Maybe she's a Landry. She was very interested in Kat and the newspaper and the history and wanting to know this about the town. So, I mean, you really could go either way there. Obviously she's telling Kat and Alice that summer that she was a Goodwin. But now that we know that she's not related to Max and Lewis, you wonder, who is she related to? Maybe she's a Landry. Maybe she just said Goodwin because she's actually Kat's child, or I'm sorry, Alice's child, or, somewhere further down the line, or, so that's where that comes into play. Who is Casey? Is she even a Goodwin? What is she lying about? So they bring that up again. So I actually loved that. However, you don't actually see Alice confront Del about the Casey thing, because it kind of ends with Kat and Del talking like, did Colton know how to time travel? Is he here now? Has he been coming back? How did a 1999 sweater end up in 2025? So that has me thinking, did Colton push Alice in? Because remember, the sweater was found by the tree when Alice was pushed in. So if Colton did push in Alice, why? Why would you pull in? If you know Alice is like your granddaughter, right? Why would you push her in the pond? So, I mean, we obviously have to assume. I know what happens when you assume, but we have to at least assume that Colton was the one that pushed Alice if that was his sweater, because the sweater was found when Alice was pushed. So it leads you to believe whoever just time traveled, put their sweater there, was still there, and pushed Alice. But however, maybe it was Evelyn, I mean, who knows? Who knows? But that's still up in the air. So I like that they touched on the Casey thing as soon as it came out of Alice's mouth. Oh, you must be Casey's brother. And you saw the look on Max's face. I lit up. I was like, yep. Casey's from the future. Like, Max isn't going to know who Casey is. Max totally didn't recognize Casey's name. Like, no, somebody must be lying. So that was exciting to me because I know I've talked about Casey before. So, and then you see, I mentioned the mom mail. So Jacob sends a little letter under the door, which was kind of cute because, like I say, it touched on the sentimentals. And it said, it's time to let go of what was lost and take hold of what's to come. So, Jacob's seeing that, and he turns around and he sees Cyrus again in his house, and he has this smirk on his face, and he looks so evil. I got goosebumps. So several times in this episode, you see Jacob have this reoccurring seeing Cyrus in his house in Lindemore, so that's a little scary because Jacob still hasn't got over that. The previews for next week were really a lot of fast clips, right? So I really don't know what to expect. They show Elliot with an engagement ring, so maybe he wants to propose to Kat. Then you see a flashback of Kat with Thomas, so maybe Thomas is time traveling or she goes back. Like I said before, there's really no reason that makes sense for her to go back to 1814, especially since Thomas had to leave and we find out he went to New York. So there's no reason for her to ever go back to 1814. So I'm thinking maybe Thomas time traveled or she travels to the future and sees Thomas. Who knows? But they do show that scene. They show a lot of scenes of the 70s with Colton and Del and Alice with Evelyn. But yeah, it was definitely a great episode, definitely packed with So much information. I'm so excited for the next episode. I hope you enjoyed my review. I know it seemed long this time, but just so much to talk about. If you want to leave me some comments or spin some theories, I love to hear from you. I hope you like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and we will talk to you at next episode next week. Bye.